3 blows rattled my father's apartment door. "Police! Open up!" Richard went pale. Madison dropped her spoon, and the sharp clink against porcelain sounded louder than her gasp. 12 hours earlier, I had refused to pay my sister's $25,000 debt. By sunrise, my father had emptied my bank account. I didn't call him. I didn't scream. I didn't warn him. I revoked his access, reported the transfer, and walked into the family meeting he demanded. Now the police were outside. But when Richard opened the door, they didn't ask about my money. They asked about a signature none of us was supposed to know existed. My name is Violet Bennett. I was 31, worked as a budget analyst, and lived alone in a small Seattle apartment where everything had a place because chaos already had a permanent address in my family. On the shelf beside my kitchen window sat a blue ceramic piggy bank with a chipped ear. My mother gave it to me when I was 8. "Save something for the woman you'll become," she used to say. She died when I was 16. After that, I became the woman everyone needed before I ever had the chance to become the woman I wanted to be. I packed Madison's lunches. I signed school forms when Dad forgot. I learned how to stretch grocery money, track bills, and tell when the power company was one late payment away from shutting us off. Richard called me his strong one. It sounded like love back then. What it really meant was that Madison was allowed to fall apart, and I was expected to clean up the pieces. Madison was 4 years younger than me, bright, charming, and beautiful in the effortless way that made strangers forgive her before she even apologized. Every new idea became her big break, every failure became bad timing, and every bill somehow found its way to me. I paid for equipment when she tried to build an online brand. I covered part of Dad's car repair when he said cash was tight. I handled little emergencies so often that no one called them favors anymore. They called them family. That Sunday night, Richard invited me over for dinner. The apartment smelled like roasted chicken and Madison's expensive perfume. A framed photo of the 3 of us sat on the mantel. All smiles, all carefully arranged. Richard waited until the plates were half empty. "Madison needs help," he said. She stared down at her napkin. "How much? 25,000. The room went still except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Richard explained it as a temporary debt, a failed project, a short-term problem. He said I had the savings and Madison had nowhere else to turn. For the first time in my life, I didn't offer a solution. "No." Madison looked up. Richard didn't raise his voice. He simply leaned back and studied me like I had spoken in a language he didn't recognize. Then he smiled. "You'll change your mind." I should have heard the threat. Instead, I heard my father. Monday morning began with rain tapping softly against my bedroom window. My phone buzzed once on the nightstand. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the bank alert. I opened the app, still half asleep, and watched the screen load. Checking account normal. Savings account almost empty. For a few seconds, my mind refused to understand what I was seeing. $25,000 had been transferred overnight. The coffee machine clicked on in the kitchen. Water hissed through the filter. The vent hummed above the stove. Everything sounded ordinary. That was the cruelest part. I walked to the window and looked at the blue piggy bank on the shelf. The chipped ear caught the gray morning light. "Save something for the woman you'll become." My mother's voice came back so clearly that I had to grip the counter. I called the bank. The representative put me on hold twice, then returned with a careful voice. The transfer was authorized using a valid financial power of attorney. I stopped breathing. 8 years earlier, after emergency surgery, Dad had placed a document beside my hospital bed. He told me it was only so he could pay my bills if something went wrong. I had signed while weak, medicated, and terrified. He had kept it, not as protection, as access. I asked the bank to freeze everything connected to the authorization before the call ended. My father was already trying to reach me. He called 3 times. On the 4th, I answered. "What did you do?" Richard demanded. His voice carried no guilt, only irritation. "I reported the transfer. You reported your own family. You took my savings. I moved money where it was needed." The words landed harder than any apology could have. "You didn't ask me. I didn't have time to debate with you while Madison's life was falling apart." "No," I said. You didn't ask because you knew my answer. Silence. Then his tone changed, softer, colder. You are making this much bigger than it needs to be. He told me to withdraw the complaint. He said the debt would be handled, the money would eventually be replaced, and no one had to know. Then Madison posted a tearful video about being abandoned by someone too selfish to help family. Within an hour, mutual friends started messaging me. Be reasonable. She's your sister. It's only money. I answered none of them. Instead, I opened the payment history. The transfer had gone directly to a lender under Madison's name. Attached to the account was a signature from my father, but the date stopped me cold. Richard had been out of town that week. He had posted photos the entire time. I pulled up an old form with his real signature and placed the two side by side. The first curve was wrong. The pressure was wrong. And suddenly, the missing money was no longer the most frightening thing on my screen. Someone had lied long before my father touched my account. I don't remember sitting down. One moment I was standing at the kitchen counter, staring at two signatures that should have matched. The next, I was on the floor with my back against the cabinet, my knees pulled to my chest. My phone kept lighting up. Dad, Madison, Dad again. I turned it face down. For years, I had believed my savings meant safety, not luxury, not status. Just one part of my life no one else could touch. Now even that had been taken. I looked at the blue piggy bank on the shelf. Save something for the woman you'll become. My mother had given me that promise. My father had treated it like permission. I cried for exactly 3 minutes. Then I stood up. I revoked the power of attorney. I changed every password. I froze my credit. I opened a new account at a different bank and moved what little remained. I saved the payments, the transfer record, and every message Richard sent after the money disappeared. I filed a formal report. Then I said nothing. No angry post, no family group text, no warning. By noon, I was driving north through steady rain toward my Aunt Linda's house. Richard had spent years describing her as bitter, unstable, impossible to please. But when she opened the door, wearing an old cardigan and holding a mug of coffee, she didn't look unstable. She looked tired and unsurprised. He used the power of attorney, I said. Linda stepped aside. Inside, the house smelled like cedar and cinnamon. A pair of garden gloves sat beside a bowl of clipped roses on the table. I told her everything. The debt, the transfer, the signature. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she folded her hands and said, "Your father has always called control responsibility." Then she told me what he had done to her years earlier. Property sold without permission. Money moved without explanation. Anyone who questioned him became the problem. He doesn't think he's stealing, she said. He thinks family ownership flows through him. She pulled a worn folder from a cabinet. Inside were records about the Bennett family land, held in a trust my grandfather had created before he died. One clause allowed the court to remove a beneficiary who committed financial abuse against a direct descendant. I stared at the page. This could cost him the land if you can prove what he did. Linda called Daniel Brooks, an attorney who handled trust disputes. Daniel didn't promise revenge. He asked for records, dates, messages, and proof. When I mentioned the signature, his voice sharpened. "That loan was already flagged," he said. "Your report may connect the missing piece." That night, Richard texted me, "Family meeting, tomorrow morning. No lawyers. Daniel told me to go, listen, and sign nothing." So I did. Richard placed a settlement paper on the table and told me to call the transfer a misunderstanding. Before I answered, 3 hard knocks shook the apartment. Then a voice thundered from the hallway. "Police! Open up!" Richard stared at the door as if he could force the sound to disappear. Madison's face went white. "Did you call them?" he asked me. I looked at the unsigned settlement paper between us. I reported what happened. Another knock slammed through the apartment. "Police. Open up." Richard's jaw tightened. For 1 second, I saw the man I had feared my entire life searching for someone to blame. Then his eyes landed on Madison. She whispered, "Dad, do they know about the loan?" The room changed. Richard turned toward her so fast the chair legs scraped the floor. "What did you just say?" "You said you handled it." "I said nothing. I didn't need to." Richard opened the door. 2 investigators stood in the hallway. Their voices were calm, almost polite. That made the fear on my father's face look even sharper. They explained they were reviewing an unauthorized transfer from my account, the use of a financial power of attorney, and a loan tied to a disputed signature. No one was arrested, but Richard was told not to destroy messages, payments, account records, or anything connected to Madison's loan. He gave a nervous laugh. "This is a family misunderstanding." One investigator looked at me. "Did you authorize the transfer? No. Were you unable to manage your finances? No." Richard stepped between us. "She is being emotional. I had legal authority. You had authority to act in her interest," the investigator said. "That is not permission to use her money for someone else's debt." Richard had no answer. Then they asked about the signature. His posture changed. His voice became cold. "I did not sign that loan." Madison looked at him, not shocked, abandoned. "Dad," he pointed at her. "She did it. I found out later." "You told me not to panic," Madison said. "You said you would fix it before anyone checked. Because you put me in that position. No. You said Violet would cover it. You said she always does." The words hit harder than the knocking. Richard had not acted in panic. He had planned around my obedience. That morning ended with separate interviews, copied records, and a warning that the investigation was only beginning. Over the next several months, Daniel built the case piece by piece. The bank confirmed Richard had used the power of attorney even though I was healthy, working, and fully capable of managing my account. A document examiner found signs that Madison had copied Richard's signature. Payments showed my $25,000 had gone directly to erase her loan. Messages proved Richard knew about the forgery before he touched my savings. Still, he offered me a deal. He would repay me slowly if I withdrew the complaint, stopped working with Daniel, and called the transfer a misunderstanding. I gave him one final chance. Repay the money. Admit what happened. Stop attacking me online. Let Madison cooperate. He refused, not because the terms were unfair, because Daniel had filed to remove him from the family trust. The land was worth about $350,000. Richard would rather risk both daughters than lose it. At the hearing, he wore a dark suit and the expression he used whenever he expected the room to obey him. Daniel laid out the power of attorney, the transfer, the loan, the forged signature, and the messages. Then he asked Richard one question. If Violet had never discovered the missing money, were you ever planning to tell her Richard stared at the table? Silence spread across the courtroom. When the judge asked about the signature, he broke. "Madison did it," he said. "I was only trying to protect this family." Madison jerked toward him. "You told me to stay quiet because you caused this." "No," she said. "You caused this when you stole from her." He turned to me, his face red. "You are destroying this family." I met his eyes. "No, Dad. I'm just not letting you use my future to hide what you both chose to do. For once." He could not make me feel guilty for telling the truth. The ruling came 8 months after the morning the police knocked on Richard's door. By then, the rain had changed to spring. I sat beside Daniel in the courtroom while the judge reviewed the final order. My hands were folded in my lap, but I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. Richard had violated the power of attorney. He had used my money for a purpose that did not benefit me. He had concealed the transfer and tried to pressure me into calling it a misunderstanding. The court ordered him to repay the $25,000 and cover part of the financial damage his actions had caused. His access to my accounts was permanently terminated. The court also enforced the protection clause in my grandfather's trust. Richard lost his interest in the family land. He didn't shout when the judge said it. He simply sank back in his chair, as if someone had removed the frame holding him upright. The land was worth around $350,000. For years, he had spoken about it like a crown waiting for him. Now it belonged to me. The issues involving Madison's forged signature moved through a separate process. I wasn't told every detail, and I didn't ask for them. She had to face the lender, cooperate with the investigation, and accept consequences that no one could quietly transfer to me. For the first time in her life, there was no family emergency fund waiting to absorb the damage. Richard wrote to me after the ruling. The first letter began with an apology. By the second paragraph, he was blaming Madison. The next one blamed Linda. Another blamed Daniel. One blamed me for choosing strangers over blood. Not one letter said, "I had no right to take your money. I placed them in a drawer and stopped reading." Madison sent me a message several weeks later. I didn't know he would choose the land over me. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I typed back, "He taught both of us that love lasted only as long as we obeyed him. You can keep living that way, or you can change. But I won't pay for the change anymore." I didn't block her. I didn't send money either. As for the land, I never wanted it. Every acre carried Richard's voice, my aunt's exile, and years of family arguments disguised as tradition. Keeping it would have meant letting him remain inside my life in a different form. So I sold it to a conservation trust. After legal costs, I rebuilt my emergency savings and enrolled in the advanced program I had postponed for years. The day I submitted the application, I placed the chipped blue piggy bank on the windowsill of my new apartment. I could have repaired the crack. I chose not to. Some things do not need to look untouched to remain valuable. A few months later, Rachel and I met at our usual diner. Coffee steamed between us. Plates clinked behind the counter. Sunlight spread across the table. Halfway through breakfast, Rachel smiled. "You haven't checked your phone once." I looked down. It was face down beside my plate. For years, silence had meant danger. A missed call meant someone needed money. A quiet morning meant the next crisis had not arrived yet. That morning, silence meant nothing was wrong. I finished my coffee while it was still hot, and for the first time, an ordinary life felt like the greatest thing I had ever won. Family is not a license to control your money, your choices, or your future. Saying no does not make you cruel. It means you finally understand that love without respect is another form of control. I did not win because Richard lost the land. I won because I stopped paying for approval that was never real. If your family has ever called you selfish for protecting yourself, you are not alone. Share your story in the comments, send this video to someone who needs it, and subscribe because one boundary can change everything.